Gupta is a prolific writer with wide-ranging interest on matters of national and international security, defense strategy, ancient Indian thought, etc. I now request Dr. Gupta to please deliver the welcome address.
Namaskar. Good morning to everyone. Mr. Pankaj Saran, Deputy National Security Advisor, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, distinguished delegates, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Vivekanand International Foundation, I would like to welcome you all to the first meeting of BIMSTEC countries' think tanks on regional security. We hope that following this meeting, this forum will emerge as a platform for robust dialogue on security issues which confront the BIMSTEC region. Such a dialogue would generate ideas from the strategic community and provide inputs to policy-making community of BIMSTEC countries. I would like to thank the National Security Council Secretariat and the Deputy National Security Advisor, Mr. Pankaj Saran, for extending support for this meeting of think tanks. My special thanks to the BIMSTEC Secretariat for their help in organizing this meeting. I would like to extend a hearty welcome to the distinguished delegations from India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, and Thailand to this meeting. Thank you for being here today with us despite the very short notice that we gave you. I would also like to welcome the members of the embassies of the BIMSTEC countries to this conference, and my special thanks to the CII, Confederation of Indian Industry, for organizing a special event for the delegates tomorrow. Excellencies and friends, the fourth summit of BIMSTEC leaders held in Kathmandu earlier this year set a goal for building a peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable Bay of Bengal region. The summit also noted that geographical contiguity, abundant natural and human resources, rich historical linkages, and cultural heritage provide great potential for cooperation amongst BIMSTEC countries and also to address the core challenges of security and development in the region. It's a matter of satisfaction that the Bay of Bengal region is being seen as a common space for cooperation. In not too distant a past, the region was a holistic region marked by intense two-way connectivity, commerce, cultural exchanges, and people-to-people contacts. The natural phenomena which are common in the Bay of Bengal also ensured that the people of the region shared their destinies. Millions of people crossed the Bay of Bengal in search of livelihoods. The cultural contacts among the people were strong and hold up to this very day. Unfortunately, during the second half of the 20th century, the region got fragmented and isolated on account of number of geopolitical developments. South Asia and Southeast Asia went their separate ways. There were no political institutions which could forge a common identity for the people of the region. The Bay of Bengal is a bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. It has an identity of its own. The concept of BIMSTEC is a recognition of that fact. It is up to the member countries to ensure that the integrity of the Bay of Bengal region is restored once again. Author Sunil Amrit, in his perceptive 2013 book, Crossing the Bay of Bengal, notes, and I quote, that Bay was once a region at the heart of global history. It was forgotten in the second half of the 20th century, carved up by the boundaries of nation states, its shared past divided into the separate compartments of national boundaries. The rise and decline of the Bay as a connected region is a story almost completely untold. It's a story of one of the largest movements of people in modern history and of environmental change on an enormous scale. It is also a story which has important consequences today, perhaps even a key to understanding Asia's future. Unquote. BIMSTEC is an attempt to conceptualize the Bay of Bengal as an integral region. This will happen if BIMSTEC can be strengthened and energized. The fourth summit of BIMSTEC identified a number of steps to strengthen the organization. The leaders recognized that BIMSTEC countries face common security challenges and that they should work together to meet these challenges. Without a peaceful and secure environment, economic cooperation within them countries, this will not materialize. BIMSTEC countries face a number of traditional and non-traditional security challenges, including that of terrorism, radicalization, violent extremism, maritime security, cybersecurity, natural disasters, climate change, food, energy, water security, economic security, and so on. The need for developing a roadmap of cooperation amongst countries to deal with these challenges is urgent and obvious. The idea of a dialogue among the strategic community of BIMSTEC countries was mooted in the first meeting of the National Security Advisors and security officials held in New Delhi in March 2017. The idea was further endorsed in the second meeting of the NSAs and security officials in Dhaka in March 2018. The first meeting of the NSAs was a landmark event. An agreed statement was issued at the end of the meeting. NSAs identified the need for close cooperation amongst security institutions of BIMSTEC countries in order to mitigate and deal with common security risks and challenges. I quote from the joint statement of the meeting. The meeting noted that the BIMSTEC member states face common security challenges and underlined the necessity of addressing traditional and non-traditional security challenges to harness economic prosperity and human security in the region. The meeting underscored the importance of recognizing the Bay of Bengal as a common security space and agreed to work out collective strategies for common responses. Unquote. The meeting decided to establish a Track 1.5 BIMSTEC Security Dialogue Forum to promote and encourage security dialogue amongst BIMSTEC strategic community. So this is the result of these meetings and this thinking which went on for many years. Friends, at the end of this dialogue, we hope to come up with some recommendations for policymakers. Maybe we should attempt for an outcome document which is emerging from this particular conference. Suggestions for policymakers, I think, is what the policymakers are also looking for. And therein lies the importance of this meeting. We also hope that we'll be able to make the platform a stage for meaningful discussions on security challenges. And we do hope that we would be able to agree on holding the next meeting of this forum sometimes next year. But we can discuss these issues. And with these words, I welcome you once again. And thank you very much for being with us. I think it's a unique forum. It's a unique meeting, and it's the first time that we'll be looking at the strategic community level in a holistic fashion, the security challenges that we are facing, and what are the common approaches that emerge out of this, and hope we'll be able to provide meaningful inputs to the policy making community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Kanwal Sibal is a former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India, earlier having served as India's ambassador to Turkey, Deputy Chief of Mission in the United States, Ambassador to Egypt, and finally Ambassador to Russia. A former member of India's National Security Advisory Board. He's also on the board of the New York East-West Institute and the Advisory Council of BBIF. I now request Ambassador Sibal to please deliver the keynote address.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really pleased and honored that I've been given an opportunity to share my thoughts on BIMSTEC with the think tank community from the member countries. All the pertinent points about BIMSTEC and why we are meeting here today have already been made by the director. One can elaborate on some of these things, but I thought I would place this meeting in a larger context. If we live in a globalized world and developments everywhere impact on all countries, and the world today is entering into a fairly turbulent phase. And there's a talk about the breakdown of the international order, and conflicts are raging all around this region. And there's potential for a serious clash uh, between powerful countries. And there is all this, how should I say, inclination to look after yourself and place the interests of your country first, which means that the cooperative framework that has been built over the years, though imperfectly, is in danger of a breakdown, which is why I think it becomes very important for countries like ours who are in the same region and around the Bay of Bengal to look at the common problems that we are facing and see how we can isolate ourselves as much as possible from the negative impact of these developments, and how we can build cooperative linkages which will individually make us stronger and collectively even more strong in terms of dealing with these challenges. I think since we are now more or less all agreed that the current international order is breaking down, and the world may get regionally organized even more and more. Uh, Therefore, BIMSTEC becomes that much more important. And if the world is moving towards multipolarity, which means basically a disaggregation of power centers, then I think BIMSTEC is just an aspect of that building of multipolarity at the international level, where we may not have any center as such, but collectively we are all participants in a multipolar exercise. Um, I think this business about America first could be very contagious, because if the most powerful country in the world becomes so self-centered and thinks that it can preserve its power and interests by focusing on its own self, then other countries can also begin to think, especially the powerful ones, along the same lines, and then we can have a big problem on our hands. Therefore, I think that's one more reason that the BIMSTEM countries are not saying my country first, but collectively our countries first. Um, we have, of course, common problems which have major implications for the world and for us, since most of the BIMSTEC countries are coastal states. Therefore, the whole issue of climate change becomes very pertinent to the future of many of these countries. Um, we find then that multilateralism is under threat. This actually seems to be now the current theme in so many international conferences. How to, in the UN, how to also, how to revive the importance, the core importance of multilateralism, rather than um, allow unilateral tendencies to hold sways. The WTO, which is a guarantee for a rules-based economic order, though when we say rules-based, if you look at it very closely, it's not always that much rules-based, but nevertheless, it is sufficiently rules-based and protects the interests of weaker countries, economically speaking, and that is now under attack. There is a talk about reforming the WTO, and that reform may go in directions which may not necessarily be in conformity with our interests. We have this looming danger of trade wars, and the repercussions of these trade wars, if they spread, will be felt by all countries. And therefore, this is something that the strategic community in the BIMSTEC countries has to look into. Uh, we have, of course, the rise of China and the whole issue of handling China, though nobody wants to speak about China per se, but indirectly China is there, and you have to think about um, what could be the best way in which the developing uh, confrontation that is looming can be handled by countries who might be affected by this. We have the revival of the Cold War. Uh, Earlier, in the first phase of the Cold War, it was between US and the Soviet Union. And now the Cold War between US and Russia is being revived, but now we have a double Cold War on the horizon. One US Russia, other is US China. So for the international community, for BIMSTEC countries individually and collectively, this becomes a big challenge. When the first Cold War was there, we had the Northern Line movement in order to cushion ourselves against the impact of this Cold War. Now with the double Cold War, uh, especially as the second Cold War is taking place in the context of very strong economic linkages. And therefore, the consequences of that can be that much more difficult for everyone. And then, if we are all agreed that political and economic power is shifting to Asia, and Asia is going to be the core geographical area where, in a sense, the destiny of the world is going to be decided. Um, then I think all the more reason for the very important seven members of BIMSTEC uh, to figure out how we're going to manage the consequences of the shift of this political and economic power, because this is not going to be a smooth exercise. It never can be a smooth exercise because interests will clash, even within the Asian states. And therefore, what is the way in which we can collectively protect our interests? Um, Sometimes I question myself about India's Act East policy because we are part of the East. So, what does Act East mean? I mean, we are at the heart of the East. Uh, in fact, you have the Far East, you have the Southeast, you have the South Asia, but that's part of Asia as a whole. I mean, if you look at India and the BIMSTEC countries, the director earlier mentioned, and this was reflected in the Kathmandu statement about the tremendous and deep and long-standing cultural, religious, civilizational links between India and Southeast Asia and the BIMSTEC countries in general. Uh, Therefore, India's Act East policy somehow is a confession how India allowed these linkages for whatever reason to get diluted. And then now we are positioning ourselves once again in Asia. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, we are as much Asian as anybody else. Um, we, because of the ties of religion and Hinduism, Buddhism, and cultural links, uh, we have now a platform on which we can build our relationship without clashes. There is no civilizational conflict between the countries that we represent, which is very important because even if the theory of the clash of civilizations has now been proved to be a bit hollow, nevertheless, there are aspects of the civilizational clash which are there on the ground, and terrorism and violent extremism and radicalism are aspects of that. But fortunately, when it comes to our region and our countries, there is no civilizational clash, and that is, I think, very strong a basis for our future cooperation as we move ahead. Our people-to-people ties are increasing. Tourism is increasing in huge numbers. In fact, many Indians now far prefer to go eastwards than westwards. because they feel much more at home, much more, the atmosphere is much more congenial. In any case, they come to face to face with their own selves, in a sense, in terms of the historical and civilizational legacies that are there, which is not the case westwards. I would say that coming to India's view of BIMSTEC and how the BIMSTEC countries should look at India, first of all, we have no territorial clashes with any BIMSTEC country. We have no maritime disputes within the BIMSTEC, which is very, very important, especially as the whole maritime domain is becoming much more conflictual today. We do not pose any ideological threat to anyone. We do not provide havens for any organization or enterprise which is determined to be disruptive and disrupt peace and security in the region. We are a democracy, but we have no ideological urge to spread democracy anywhere. So we don't believe genuinely in intervening in the political affairs of other countries with a desire to push them towards democracy. And even though our military strength is expanding, but I think people in the think tank community who can look at these issues dispassionately, our military strength is essentially defensive in nature. It is not offensive in nature, and we don't want to build up an offensive capability unnecessarily, because we don't have we don't have a colonial past, and we don't want to have a colonial type of future where we are looking for placing ourselves in various parts of the globe as part of our expansion of our geopolitical ambitions. And finally, I think an economically rising India is good for Indians themselves, of course, but it is also good for our neighbors, for BIMSTEC countries, because we can have more trade with each other and we can collectively build up greater prosperity. And I'm sure India will become an increasingly attractive partner. We've had this when we had the BRICS summit in September 2016. We wanted to give a higher profile to BIMSTEC, and the BIMSTEC countries were invited to the BRICS summit very successfully, and there was a very good response. And I think that was one of the objectives which was listed in the Kathmandu communique of giving more prominence to BIMSTEC in international organizations and other forums. So there again, that purpose was fulfilled. After the Kathmandu summit, India proposed a BIMSTEC military exercise that got into a bit of a controversy here and there. But if we are looking at security, the one way to build security is to build a mutual self-confidence. And one way to build that confidence is to have your military forces talking to each other, interacting with each other, exercising with each other. So it's not as if there was something which was tangential or not necessary, but I think if you look at regional organizations elsewhere, even the SCO, they hold these military exercises and this and that, and the purpose is what? Purpose is to make the militaries of various countries familiar with each other, so they can have greater trust and confidence. So that is it. And finally, the panel discussions, I went through the program, and I find that they're very, very interesting topics for discussion. And undoubtedly, since the think tanks are involved and their job is to think, therefore they will come up with some new thoughts on these subjects. The concept note itself draws attention to the direction in which these discussions should go. insofar as the subjects identified are concerned, the threat of terrorism and radicalization and maritime security, maritime order, capacity building, maritime connectivity, piracy. I think these are very uh, pertinent subjects and which are very current and topical. Uh, there is this great threat of terrorism. It is actually uh, both surprising and not so surprising that the most powerful country in the world, along with allies, have been declaring war on terror and have been trying to eliminate terror from everywhere. But the problem has not gone away. Uh, we've not been able to resolve our problem with regard to the terrorist onslaught on us from certain geographies. It's a very, very difficult issue to handle. Um, War has not solved it. What else can solve it? Discussion is not going to solve it. Um, Conversations or piecemeal steps at the level of society to change perspectives, to change thinking is a way, but it'll take a long time, long time to effect those changes. Ideologies are not easily defeated, and if they are religious ideologies, which derive their strength not from Karl Marx's Das Kapital, but from religious sources, it becomes that much more difficult to handle them. So um, let's see how the panel discussions go with regard to what should be done practically. The only answer is that we can try and isolate ourselves from these dangers as much as possible with much greater cooperative mechanisms to be built up, whether it's mutual legal assistance, treaties, or other forms by which we can keep ourselves informed, cooperation between intelligence agencies, whatever else. Um, and so we can attenuate this danger, but it will not be easy to eliminate it. With regard to transnational crimes, arms smuggling, etc., we see that is happening in parts of our region, and there are insurgencies, and insurgencies are being fed. They do get arms from somewhere. So this is a very topical area for our discussions. And disaster management clearly is very much a central issue for most of our states, especially coastal ones, and with climate change and cyclones and hurricanes and tsunamis. And we've seen them in our region. There is a whole need for building up capacities, come to each other's aid as quickly as possible, and also do this capacity building as much as is possible. Uh, Now, I just wanted to make a slight point on the terrorism issue, which I think is pertinent. I think there is now a sense of helplessness in dealing with this issue, and I see this in the context of uh, having seen that you cannot fight Taliban. The best is to bring them into the political process. This is not a good thing, where you are ready to compromise politically with a terrorist, radical extremist organization because you can't handle it otherwise. And this is just to underline what I said, the difficulties of dealing with them. On maritime security, I think this is, until recently, this issue was not in the forefront of our concerns. Uh, I think this has become an issue uh, because of what we've seen has happened in the South China Sea. And that has sent reverberations. Plus, the maritime strategy of China, which may be justified in some ways with regard to um, China's legitimate interest in preserving its sea lanes of communication. But the manner in which China has projected this has become a cause for concern. And the strategy and long-term strategy behind their maritime ambitions about acquisition of ports in key areas, and now, of course, building of naval bases, which means far more movement, not only of commercial traffic, but also of the naval traffic, coupled with their total intransigence on territorial issues, as we've seen in the South China Sea. Uh, this is the reason why this whole concept of Indo-Pacific and maritime security strategy has arisen. Otherwise, it wouldn't have, because the sea lanes of communication are not being threatened. There's no reason why they should be threatened by anybody. These are global commons, and everybody is interdependent on the movement of energy and trade and everything else. So I think this is something we should keep in mind when we uh, talk about maritime security. And since some of the BIMSTEC member countries are involved in the grand design that China has, to what extent there should be a balance between legitimate national interests of the BIMSTEC countries in receiving infrastructure support from countries which can give that, and the larger geopolitical global ambitions of the countries who provide that. What should be the balance? That is something, that's a challenge that the think tank community in our countries has to divide, has to think about. Engagement with China has to be there, but should that engagement with China create security issues for our member states? That's another issue on which I think some reflection is needed. I think I've said enough. Because you have to speak also. So I'll conclude by saying that the Kathmandu communique, which I read through, has outlined some very important milestones that we need to achieve, and we should work on that. And some of them, which I noted, was this MLATs and the cooperation between the national security advisors on counterterrorism and transnational crimes, renewable and clean energy, and BIMSTEC, grid interconnectivity, importance of Buddhism as a connection between the countries, the Buddhist circuit, the blue economy, an early conclusion of the BIMSTEC FTA negotiations, visa facilitation, strategic strengthening government and private sector cooperation, etc. Some of the areas which I find were missing, which I found a bit surprising, is cybersecurity, although this can be brought under the chapeau of security, but there was no specific mention of cybersecurity as an issue, whereas wherever you go and you talk about security now, cybersecurity on the top of the agenda. About the digital economy, I found that there was no specific mention of that. Internet management, this is a subject which has been missing. I think we are all now concerned about social media and some of the problems that social media is creating for peace and security of our societies. And that's an issue also that needs to be gone into the whole area of artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, etc., etc. So there are a lot more areas on which I think all of us should get together, put our heads together, and see what recommendations can be made to strengthen our cooperation in these fields. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Pankaj Saran took over as Deputy National Security Advisor in the National Security Council Secretariat of India in September 2018. Mr. Pankaj Saran is a career diplomat who joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1982. He has served in Indian missions in Moscow, Dhaka, Washington, Cairo, and Geneva. At headquarters in New Delhi, he served in different positions in the Ministry of External Affairs, including in the Europe East Division as staff officer to the Foreign Secretary and as head of the division dealing with India's relations with Nepal and Bhutan from 2005 to 2007. He's also served 2 terms in the Prime Minister's office as director and later as Joint Secretary. He most recently served as India's High Commissioner to Bangladesh from 2012 to 2015, and then as India's ambassador to Russia from 2016 to 2018. I now request Ambassador Saran to please deliver the inaugural address.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Ambassador Kamal Sibal, one of our most distinguished foreign secretaries and diplomats, distinguished audience, distinguished delegates. Thank you very much for inviting me today to this dialogue on regional security. I would like to begin by conveying to the participants the greetings and best wishes of the National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval, who has asked me to convey his high appreciation to the Vivekanand International Foundation, as well as to all the participating countries for taking time out to participate in this first ever meeting of think tanks on security issues. He himself holds great store by the 2 dialogues that have been held at the level of the national security advisors of the BIMSTEC countries. And India believes that this is a new dimension of our cooperation within BIMSTEC, and it is a manifestation of the growing maturity and the growing convergence of views among the member states. As has been rightly said, BIMSTEC has evolved over the years. It began in 1997, which is 21 years ago. And in this period, it has held 4 summits, but the process of the evolution has been relatively slow and deliberate. In fact, it took many, many years before the first summit was convened in 2004. And if you look at the gaps between each summit, they were substantial. There was a gap of 6 years between the first summit and the second summit. And then there was a gap of 4 years. And there was a gap of 6 years between the second and the third summit. But the fourth summit was held within 4 years, which was early this year. It has also taken time for the BIMSTEC to establish its secretariat, and this was done in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, and Additional Foreign Secretary Sri Lanka who's present here today, was director of the secretariat, the first director, and I had the privilege of attending that opening ceremony in Dhaka in 2014. I think it is no secret that BIMSTEC is a coalition of countries which have a lot in common. India itself has common borders with 5 of the member states of BIMSTEC. We have common maritime regions with all the countries of BIMSTEC. And it is geographically very strategically positioned between South and Southeast Asia. The importance of the Bay of Bengal as an economic and scientific community and region is evident. When the leaders met in 2016 in Goa, they pledged to make BIMSTEC a stronger organization, and they also agreed on an agenda for future action that included issues such as counter-terrorism and transnational crime, disaster management, trade, investment, energy, etc. One of the recommendations of the summit of our leaders was also the meeting of the national security chiefs, which we have done. Today's meeting we regard as an important contribution to the discourse on security among BIMSTEC countries at the level of thinkers and strategic experts. There are many models of cooperation on security issues worldwide. BIMSTEC is uniquely positioned to offer its own model of cooperation. And one of the factors that unites almost all of us in the BIMSTEC is the fact that in one way or the other, all the BIMSTEC member states are victims of terrorism, and we have a common interest in combating this threat to our national security. We look forward to your deliberations to see how we can enhance our cooperation and insulate ourselves from all kinds of threats. That includes terrorism, but it also includes other non-traditional forms of threats to security. Connectivity is another very important dimension of our collective security. And here we need to look at connectivity as a tool to enhance security, as a tool to work with each other. The connectivity dimension need not be and cannot be only physical, it also has to be among people, among organizations, and among security agencies. And the fact is that today, more than ever before, our security agencies need to be much better networked to be able to fight the threats that we face. And as Ambassador Sibal had rightly mentioned, uh, the threat from the social media and the internet is far more lethal than we have appreciated. I think we cannot underestimate the dangers this poses to each of our countries, and it should form an important part of our deliberations. We have also um, to look at how we can harness the Bay of Bengal for positive, productive activities. Once again, we find that apart from piracy, there are other threats, which include illegal migration, trafficking of people, disaster management, uh, drug running, which are all threats which confront us almost on a daily basis. And we need to, in our own uh, unique ways, establish solutions which we can look at to combat such threats. Radicalization of populations through the social media and otherwise is an important threat, and we need to look at that. The fact is that the poison of radicalization and extremism is today able to travel very fast through internet and through the cyber medium, from the new fountainhead that has been created in the world, which is loosely centered around the area of Syria, Iraq, Libya, and it is traveling towards our region. It has already traveled to our region through Afghanistan, and it has